Welcome to the Daily Word Verse by Verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study the book of Hebrews. Keep in mind I am using the Holman Christian Standard Bible, so if you're using a different translation, the read is different, but the message is the same. Also keep in mind that these Daily Word Verse by Verse studies are uploaded to my YouTube channel, BP The Bible Perspective. That's BP The Bible Perspective. So like and share these videos and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. Okay, we're in chapter 2, Hebrews chapter 2. We're going to pick it up with verse 14. Not Paul. The writer of Hebrews is, and he started back making the statement he says, he did not subject Jesus to, or he did not accept the angels, the world to angels. And then he makes the statement that Jesus, being, of course, superior to angels, became lower than angels. But then now he's saying this is why he is becoming lower. In other words, this is not just a stunt of Jesus, but he came lower than angels. Remember, angels, when they show up, they do show up with glory, might, only because that's just who they are, and it serves to arrest the attention, the senses, to say that this is a messenger of God. Take heed, okay? Jesus came lower than the angels, and he's going to tell us why, and I think it's going to be very important that we understand this. Verse 10, for in bringing many sons to glory, okay, it was appropriate that all things exist for him and through him. And then it says to make this of their salvation perfect. And the purpose of Jesus coming lower was to bring us to glory, to bring us to God. So in verse 14, he says, now since the children have flesh and blood in common, Jesus also shared in these, so that through his death he might destroy the one holding the power of death, that is, the devil. Now this is kind of interesting. I don't know the depth of this. In other words, the idea of when he says that Satan or the devil has the power of death, we do know throughout Scripture Satan has a level of power, a level of rulership. The ills and evils of the world can be directly traced to Satan. For example, in the book of Job, we see that he had the power to afflict sickness and even death. So when he says that he destroyed him who was holding the power of death, the depth of that understanding, I'm not sure I understand fully. Other than, here's the good news, Jesus destroyed him who had the power of death. Okay, that is the good news. And then verse 15 says, and free those who were held in slavery all their lives by the fear of death. Now, what did he mean by the fear of death? One, of course, we in our orientation know only the physical life. We don't know what's on the other side of death. Yet, everyone dies. Right? Everyone dies. So what is after death? And it seems that there is this innate dread of that. Right? We just don't want to do it. We cling to it, right? One of the most, I think you have to really override the senses and instincts to live, to commit suicide. People do, right? They do. I think they come to regret it the moment after death. But death is something that we fear. That's why we shrink away from it. He says he takes the fear of that away. And I think in context here, it's referring to, of course, facing God. Because if you go back up into verse we go back up into verse 2. Um, for if the message spoken through angels was legally binding, every transgression and disobedience be of just punishment, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? That's the dread of death. And so now he says Jesus has taken that dread or that fear of facing God away. Why? By the sacrifice in his body. Now he'll get to that later. But Jesus has taken the fear of that. Verse 16 says, "For it is clear that he does not reach out to help angels, but to help Abraham's offspring." Now, Abraham's offspring here, two things. Abraham's offspring he's referring to, talking to the Jews here. But remember, those who have faith are also Abraham's spiritual offsprings. And notice he says that he doesn't help angels. In other words, Jesus did not die for angels, which brings in an interesting point, that those angels who rebelled with Satan have no redemption. That is not who the redemption of Christ applies to. They cannot. Those angels, for whatever reason, when I say it for whatever reason, because we don't have a lot of information about it, but those angels who rebel against God, there is no chance of redemption for them. Our chance of redemption is in accepting Christ. So he says, verse 17, therefore he had to be like his brothers in every way, so that he could become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For since he himself was tested and has suffered, he is able to help those who are tested. Again, I think to fully understand this you have to kind of have a Jewish mind, and in the law, in which he's going to get into later. But notice he said he became like his brothers in every way, meaning the physical. Jesus, who was very God in nature, God in substance, took upon human form. And by the way, when we talk about the Trinity, which we're not going to get into any depth, we're talking about the Trinity or the deity of Christ. Remember that it is over the span of scriptures that we interpret and say this, make the Trinitarian statement. And this is one of them. He became like his brothers in every way. Jesus is 100% God while being 100% man. There's no difference. So Jesus did not take upon the form of a man. Unlike, I mentioned this in the last time, what would be considered a Christophany or a theophany, when God takes upon the form of a human, that form may or may not be an actual human body, whatever, we don't know, okay? But Jesus did not, what he's referring to here is not a Christophany. Jesus was a actual flesh and blood human being. And that's why he says that in every way. So one God, two natures, the divine nature and as well as the human nature. And some people, this is repulsive, by the way. Muslims, for example, find this repulsive that, God is not a human. Well, here's the testimony of it. Now, the word propitiation is, again, the word you need to be very familiar with, because it means that Jesus' sacrifice is the one in which God is satisfied with. So he cannot be satisfied with my or any human effort, but that he is satisfied with Jesus' sacrifice. So we get some information that he says that he had to be like his brother in every way, so that he become a merciful and faithful high priest, making propitiation for the sins of the people, or the sacrifice that satisfies God. Okay, so one of those criteria was he became a human, fully human, so that he could fully satisfy the righteous claims of God. And then the result of that is, since he himself was tested, he can also help those who are tested. So you can't say to Jesus, you don't know what I'm going through, Jesus. Jesus knows exactly what you're going to. He is a faithful high priest. Now he's going to get into the whole priest in upcoming chapters. Okay, so we'll pick it up in chapter 3 in the next video. I will see you then.